The federal government has said that its online harms bill is imminent. They've said this bill will include, among other things, a ban on so-called online hate speech. As you know, the Conservatives a decade ago repealed Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act, which the Liberals have talked about reintroducing and tried in the last parliamentary term. Will the Conservatives oppose the reintroduction of these provisions and the Liberals' approach to so-called online hate speech?
Yes.
Thank you. Amen, brother. The Conservative leader in Canada, he's one of our favorites, Pierre Poilievre. That's right. I pronounced it correctly. I had promised earlier in the year that I would only pronounce his name correctly if he actually beats Justin Trudeau. But I've decided after this latest exchange that he deserves it. Pierre Poilievre facing down a couple of critics there. Well, one reporter who was a critic, another reporter who seemed a little more friendly to the Conservative side of the equation. We'll start with the critic, who is very angry that the Conservative Party is not going to support Justin Trudeau's hate speech legislation. Let's take a look at how Pierre Poilievre handled that.
The federal government has said that its online harms bill is imminent. They've said this bill will include, among other things, a ban on so-called online hate speech. As you know, the Conservatives a decade ago repealed Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act, which the Liberals have talked about reintroducing and tried in the last parliamentary term. Will the Conservatives oppose the reintroduction of these provisions and the Liberals' approach to so-called online hate speech?
Yes, we will oppose Justin Trudeau's latest attack on freedom of expression. And I want to ask, what does Justin Trudeau mean when he says the word hate speech? He means speech he hates. So, for example, let's go through some of the things he said is hate speech. Jerry Butts, the PMO puppet master, said that it was hate speech to criticize Trudeau for using the ridiculous term people kind, right? Justin Trudeau said anyone who criticized him during the pandemic was engaging in hate speech. Basically, anybody who disagrees with his radical agenda when it comes to kids, he says is hate speech. He attacked Muslim parents who were protesting against his agenda. Is he going to criminalize those Muslim parents for protecting their children in schools? Go down the list of things that Justin Trudeau disapproves of, and you can imagine all of the things that will be criminalized. And then there becomes the question of who is going to be in charge of determining what is hate speech. Recently, a school board in Ontario banned Anne Frank's books. Okay, so would that be considered hate speech under Justin Trudeau's woke authoritarian agenda? I think it would. So anyone who thinks that speech they don't like is going to be criminalized and therefore the bill should be supported, go through that. Those people should go through the list of their own thoughts that Justin Trudeau considers to be unacceptable views, and you can assume that he will ban all of that as well.
100%. Thank you. Amen, brother. Pierre Poilievre, because that's exactly the problem with all these hate speech doctrines, is that they decide what hate speech is. And by the way, dangerous speech online. Listen, I don't know a whole lot about speech laws and freedom of speech laws and public assemblage laws in Canada, but I assure you there are already laws on the books against speech that incites violent acts, right? I assure you that they're there. So whether it's online or not, if you're inciting someone to violence, you could very well face criminal prosecution. I have no doubt about that. So what are we really talking about here? Well, if Justin Trudeau, as Pierre Poilievre just laid out, and his left-wing cabinet and lawmakers get to define what hate speech is, well, we'll have the bizarro world like this woman, if you remember right, during the truckers' strike. Remember the trucker strike a year ago with all the truckers who didn't want to get the vaccination because they literally sit alone in a truck all day long, and there's no reason why they should have to get the vaccination, and they were getting put out of work because of it. So they drove their trucks in a convoy to the Capitol. Remember this woman? This is a fellow Liberal in Canada, part of Justin Trudeau's political party.
How much vitriol do we have to see of honk honk, which is an acronym for Hail Hitler, do we need to see by these protesters on social media?
That's right. People in comment sections on Facebook were saying after she put up a video or something, they would say honk honk in solidarity with the truckers, right? Honk honk. Right? When you're on the side of a trucker and you want to show your approval, you honk honk your horn. And according to this woman, this genius, this Rhodes Scholar, this president of Mensa in Ottawa, honk honk is really, what did she say? Hail Hitler? How much vitriol do we have to see of honk honk, which is an acronym for Hail Hitler? All right, so it's not an acronym. I thought they spoke good English up there in Canada. That's not an acronym, number one. Also, it's not Hail Hitler. I believe it's Heil Hitler. But regardless of all of that, she's proving to you right there that's hate, that's vitriol. Honk honk in a comment section would be hate speech, and you'd face criminal penalties for it if Justin Trudeau and this member of the Mensa chapter of Ottawa had their way. Here's Justin Trudeau himself talking about what he considers to be hateful speech.
I have attended protests and rallies in the past when I agreed with the goals, when I supported the people expressing their concerns and their issues. Black Lives Matter is an excellent example of that. But I have also chosen to not go anywhere near protests that have expressed hateful rhetoric, violence towards fellow citizens, and a disrespect, not just of science, but of the frontline health workers and, quite frankly, the 90% of truckers who have been doing the right thing to keep Canadians safe, to put food on our tables. Canadians know where I stand. This is a moment for responsible leaders to think carefully about where they stand and who they stand with.
I love that. I've attended protests with responsible organizations that don't engage in hateful, violent rhetoric or violent acts, like Black Lives Matter. Maybe the Black Lives Matter protests up north of our border was a little different in Canada than they were here in America, but I wouldn't necessarily call them peaceful and without hateful rhetoric or hateful actions. But Pierre Trudeau was even more explicit when he talked about this legislation they're proposing, this assault on free speech. Here, take a listen to his words.
First of all, it's what we're seeing right now across the country as people are protesting at hospitals, people are shouting at store clerks and waitresses for demanding masks or vaccinations. These are all fed by online misinformation, disinformation, deliberate sharing of anti-science conspiracy theories that are damaging our society. And we do have to stand up cleanly against that.
All right, so let's just unpack that for a second, because he gave some really good examples there. People who are upset about having to get the vaccination or wear a mask because they are apparently anti-science and guilty of misinformation, disinformation, and, as the clip goes on, hateful rhetoric that leads to violence. Well, now, the last I checked, the science has evolved on masks and on social distancing and on the vaccination itself. In fact, they had to redefine the word vaccine to accommodate the new definition that this shot for COVID actually fits into, right? Because this shot is not a vaccine in the traditional sense that if you get it, you're inoculated from catching the disease or spreading the disease. Nah, it doesn't do that. They told you it did. And if you stood up at this time and said, I don't think this vaccine keeps you from getting the disease or spreading the disease, you were anti-science and you were engaging in spreading misinformation. Now, of course, it's what the CDC and other government agencies admit to. Same with masks, same with social distancing. Recently, Anthony Fauci said he had no idea where the 6-foot distancing rule came from. It just sort of happened. Funny how that sort of happened, considering that was the one rule that motivated all of our election bureaus around the country to rely on mail-in ballots and drop boxes for ballots instead of having people stand in line to vote during the pandemic. Remember, we can't have people standing in line to vote because we can't ensure that they're socially distanced by 6 feet while they're in line and while they're voting. And yet the 6-foot rule was made up. And even Anthony Fauci says he doesn't know where it came from. But see, all of this that I'm saying right now, the reality, the truth, the facts about what happened during the pandemic lockdown, at the time, Justin Trudeau characterized all of it as misinformation and hate speech. And given the parameters of this new law that they're trying to pass, you'd face criminal penalties if you engaged in it. As Pierre Poilievre just said, rightly, you disagree with Justin Trudeau, you're guilty of hate speech. That's how they define hate speech. You know what's not hate speech in Justin Trudeau's Canada? Here's a protest recently in Canada of people who are in favor of the Palestinian terrorists and Hamas. They're protesting against Israel defending themselves. Take a look at these images. This is not hate speech. Take a look at the sign you're about to see here. No one got arrested here. The police are standing by, and they're just fine with Auschwitz. So raising the specter of the Holocaust, where millions of Jews were slaughtered by the Nazis, is literally not hate speech in Justin Trudeau's Canada. Look at where's the police? Where's the police arresting him? Not happening. The Hamas Nazis can cheer on Auschwitz in Justin Trudeau's Canada. You know what else they can do at that protest? They can give the Hitler salute. They can give the Hitler salute over there in Justin Trudeau's Canada. That doesn't fall under the auspices of hate speech. But you dare to say that maybe this mask isn't going to do anything, and maybe my child shouldn't have to wear a mask because it inhibits his breathing. Straight to jail. All right, Pierre Poilievre then got a question from, apparently there's one conservative reporter in Canada, good on him, asked a question about radical gender ideology and whether Poilievre would support defining men as men and women as women biologically. And here's what he had to say.
For the last few years, our news organization has been covering what can only be described as a war on women. Biological males are pretending to be females, and these men are invading female safe spaces. This includes female sports ranging from volleyball to rugby. As well, men pretending to be women are gaining access to female shelters and even female prisons. This has collectively led to real women and girls being emotionally abused, physically injured. My question, sir, is should you form the next federal government, will you make female safe spaces safe again by introducing legislation that bans so-called transgender women from participating in female sports and getting access into female shelters and female prisons?
Female spaces should be exclusively for females, not for biological males. You asked if I introduced legislation on that. A lot of the spaces you described are provincially and municipally controlled. So it is unclear what federal legislation would reach federal legislation would have to change them. But obviously, female sports, female change rooms, female bathrooms should be for females, not for biological males.
There you go. I mean, Canada has a choice. It's pretty clear. And he's on the right side of that issue, too. It took him a little while, but he's there. And I do like that slogan, make female spaces safe again. Make female spaces safe again. It's not quite as good as Make America Great Again, but it's right there. Also, I recognize I said Pierre Trudeau. Well, again, I make mistakes during this show to just emphasize and prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that there's no teleprompter and this is not a scripted show. I meant Justin Trudeau. I apologize. Pierre Trudeau, of course, is Justin Trudeau's father. Unless you believe that very believable Fidel Castro rumor, but let's just stick with Justin Trudeau is his name, and I apologize for the error.